Pay rent or get out of my house. Those were the words my daughter-in-law Vanessa screamed at me last Tuesday morning, standing in the kitchen of the house I'd helped buy. The house where I'd been living for 3 years since my wife Sarah died. My name is Henry Peterson, and I'm 67 years old. $310,000. That's what I gave my son Bradley to start Pinnacle Roofing. My entire retirement savings from 37 years as a mail carrier. Now I can't afford my $1,200 monthly insulin, and his wife is demanding $600 rent, or I'm homeless. What Vanessa doesn't know is that I own 51% of this house, and I have the deed to prove it. I looked at her eviction notice, folded it carefully, and put it in my file cabinet next to some very interesting documents. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This is the story of how a quiet mail carrier taught his family the difference between generosity and stupidity. Let me take you back to March 15th, 2019. That's when Bradley called me, excited about this roofing opportunity. He'd found the perfect house in Columbus, Ohio. 3 bedrooms, ranch style, perfect for starting a family. Dad, if you could help with the down payment, Vanessa and I could get the business going. We'd pay you back within 2 years. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. The house cost $360,000. I put down $180,000. 51% ownership, the paper said. I kept the receipts. Bradley put his name on 49%. Vanessa's name wasn't on anything, but there was something Vanessa didn't know about that house. 6 months later, Bradley came back. The roofing business needed equipment. Tools, trucks, insurance bonds. He'd done the math. $130,000 would get Pinnacle Roofing off the ground. I transferred the money from my 401k. Every penny I'd saved over 37 years with the Postal Service. The penalties alone cost me $26,000. Then COVID hit. The business struggled. Bradley needed another loan. $80,000 this time. I liquidated my life insurance policy, cashed out my savings bonds, sold my truck, and started riding the bus. Just until we get back on our feet, Dad. By 2021, I'd given them $310,000 total, my entire retirement. But Pinnacle Roofing was thriving. They had 6 full-time employees, 12 trucks, contracts worth millions. I was proud of what we'd built together. Then my wife Sarah died. Cancer. The medical bills wiped out what little I had left. I moved in with Bradley and Vanessa. Temporarily, they said, just until I got back on my feet. That was 3 years ago. Last April, the doctor gave me news that changed everything. Type 2 diabetes, severe. The kind that requires insulin 4 times a day. Novolog pens. Without insurance, each pen cost $200. I needed 6 pens a month. $1,200. Bradley made $80,000 a year from the business I'd funded. Vanessa drove a 2023 BMW X5 with $850 monthly payments. They took vacations to Cancun, bought a 75-inch TV, installed granite countertops. But when I asked for help with my medication, the answer was always the same. Money's tight right now, Dad. I started rationing my insulin, checking my glucose less often. Test strips cost $1 each. I was testing twice a day instead of 4 times. My numbers were all over the place. 140 after meals, 200 at bedtime, sometimes higher. Last month, Vanessa started talking about me contributing more to household expenses. You eat our food, she said. Use our electricity. The least you could do is pay rent. I reminded her gently that I'd put the down payment on the house, that I'd funded the business that paid for everything. That was a gift, she said. Ancient history. This is about now. $600 a month, she announced last Tuesday, starting June 1st, or you need to find somewhere else to live. $600, half my Social Security check, more than I spent on insulin. I asked Bradley privately if we could work something out. Maybe I could help with bookkeeping for the business, earn my keep, he shrugged. Vanessa handles the household finances now. I stay out of it. That's when I realized my son had forgotten something important. Generosity has limits. Mine had an expiration date. The eviction notice was typed on Vanessa's laptop. Pink paper, fancy font. It gave me 30 days to vacate the premises or start paying rent. I read it 3 times in my bedroom. The same bedroom I'd lived in for 3 years. The same bedroom in the house I'd helped buy. My glucose monitor beeped again. 243. Dangerous territory. I needed insulin, but my last pen was running low. 3 days left, maybe 4 if I stretched it. The pharmacy wanted $600 up front for my next prescription. I had $247 in my checking account. My next Social Security payment wasn't due for 2 weeks. I called my doctor's office. Maybe there was a payment plan. Generic options. Anything. Mr. Peterson, insulin is insulin, the nurse explained. There's no generic for Novolog. Have you looked into Medicare Part D? I had. The coverage didn't start until January. It was only May 27th. That evening, Vanessa made her expectations crystal clear. We were sitting at the dinner table, the one I'd bought during my second furniture run after moving in. Bradley was scrolling through his phone. She was showing me listings on hers. There's a nice senior community 15 minutes away, she said, turning the screen toward me. Independence Manor. They have studios for $800 a month. Very reasonable. $800. More than my entire Social Security check. Vanessa, I said carefully, I put $180,000 down on this house. I think that earns me the right to... That was years ago. Her voice cut through mine like broken glass. Bradley and I have been paying the mortgage ever since. We've put in new floors, painted every room, renovated the kitchen. This is our house now. Our house. I looked at Bradley. My son was still scrolling. He hadn't looked up once. Son, I said, you remember the papers we signed, the ownership agreement? Finally, he glanced up. Dad, that was different. You were helping us get started. Now we need to think about what makes sense for everyone. What made sense for everyone? That night I lay awake calculating numbers. If I paid Vanessa $600 in rent, I'd have $647 left from Social Security, minus $400 for food and utilities, my share, according to her latest demands. That left $247. Not enough for insulin. If I moved to Independence Manor at $800 a month, I'd need to supplement with $400 from somewhere. I had no savings left, no retirement accounts, no family nearby except the ones trying to evict me. The math was simple. I couldn't afford to leave, and I couldn't afford to stay. But there was something neither of them had considered, something I'd been thinking about for weeks, ever since Vanessa started her rent campaign. I got up at 2 a.m. and opened my file cabinet, the one I'd brought from my old house, the one they never asked about. Inside were manila folders, labeled and dated in my careful postal worker handwriting. Property documents, purchase agreement, transfer records, attorney consultations. I pulled out the folder marked insurance. Insurance in this case meant Samuel Green, Sarah's attorney, the one who'd helped us write our wills, the one who'd explained property law when we bought our first house 30 years ago. I'd called Samuel 3 days after Vanessa's first rent demand. Quiet consultation, cash payment for my grocery money, $150 for an hour of his time. Henry, he'd said, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought, you own 51% of this property. That's not a gift. That's not ancient history. That's a legal ownership stake. What does that mean exactly? It means you have majority ownership rights. You can't be evicted from property you own. In fact, as the majority owner, you have certain privileges regarding occupancy decisions. Privileges regarding occupancy decisions. Samuel had given me a business card. Call me when you're ready to exercise those rights. I looked at that card in the darkness of my bedroom. Samuel Green Real Estate Law. Available 24/7 for existing clients. Tomorrow was Memorial Day. Vanessa had invited 25 neighbors for a backyard barbecue. She loved showing off the house. Our house, she called it. Their success story. I put Samuel's card back in the folder. Checked my glucose one more time. 198. Better. Vanessa wanted a deadline. She'd picked the wrong person to pressure. 47 years of postal service teaches you about deadlines and consequences. I had plans for her Memorial Day barbecue. Plans that would surprise everyone. The next morning, Vanessa was in the kitchen making lists for her party. 25 neighbors, she kept saying. The whole cul-de-sac would see how well they were doing. I poured my coffee and sat down at the counter. Black coffee, my usual breakfast. Cheaper than juice, and it didn't spike my glucose. Henry, she said without looking up from her notepad, I need you to move your medications off the bathroom counter. Guests will be using that bathroom. My medications. 4 bottles lined up next to the sink. Metformin, blood pressure pills, glucose test strips, my last insulin pen nearly empty. Where would you like me to put them? Your bedroom. Keep your personal items in your personal space. Personal space. In the house I'd helped buy. I took a sip of coffee and made a decision. It was time to test the waters. Vanessa, I've been thinking about our conversation, the rent situation. She looked up. What about it? I'd like to discuss alternatives. There are no alternatives. $600 a month, or you find somewhere else to live. What if I told you there might be some complications with that arrangement? Her pen stopped moving. What kind of complications? Legal complications. Bradley walked into the kitchen, hair still messy from sleep. He opened the refrigerator and grabbed orange juice. Expensive stuff. Tropicana with pulp. $3 a bottle. What are you talking about, Dad? I'm talking about ownership papers. Property rights. The kind of legal details people sometimes forget. Vanessa set down her pen. Henry, I don't know what you think you found in your files, but this house belongs to Bradley and me. We've been paying the mortgage for 5 years. Part of the mortgage, I corrected. Not all of it. The important part. According to who? Her voice shifted, colder, sharper. According to reality. According to the fact that we're the ones building equity while you're living here for free. Free. Vanessa, nothing about my situation here has been free. I've contributed more to this household than you realize. Contributed what? You don't work. You don't pay rent. You eat our food and use our utilities. Bradley poured his orange juice. Still hadn't said a word. Son, I said, do you remember how much money I gave you for this house? Dad, we've been over this. Have we? Because I remember $180,000 for the down payment. I remember another $130,000 for business startup costs. Another $80,000 when COVID hit. Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. Ancient history. That was startup money, investment capital. You weren't buying permanent residency rights. Wasn't I? The question hung in the air like smoke. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not the eviction notice. Something else. Something I'd copied from my files that morning. This is the property deed, I said quietly. From March 15th, 2019. Would you like to see what it says about ownership percentages? Bradley finally looked up from his juice. Dad, what are you doing? I'm reminding my family about legal facts. I unfolded the paper and placed it on the counter. The deed. Official. Stamped. Legal. Property owners. Henry Peterson, 51%. Bradley Peterson, 49%. Vanessa stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. This doesn't mean anything, she said. You gave that money as a gift. Did I? Because according to this legal document, filed with Franklin County, I own 51% of this house. Majority ownership. You can't evict us from our own house. Our house, I agreed, but majority ownership comes with certain privileges. I folded the deed and put it back in my pocket. Took another sip of coffee. I have a call with my attorney this afternoon, I said. Samuel Green. Perhaps you remember him. He handled Sarah's will. Bradley set down his juice glass harder than necessary. Dad, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Am I? Because from where I sit, someone is trying to evict a majority property owner from his own house. That sounds complicated to me. Vanessa's party lists were forgotten. She was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. What do you want? She asked. But I want respect. I want acknowledgement of my contributions to this family. And I want my medical needs taken seriously. We can't afford... You can afford Cancun. You can afford granite countertops. You can afford $850 a month for a BMW. But you can't afford my insulin. I stood up and rinsed my coffee cup, placed it carefully in the dishwasher. Enjoy your party planning, I said. I have phone calls to make. I spent the morning in my bedroom organizing documents. 5 years of financial records spread across my desk like evidence at a trial. Bank statements showing the transfers, property deed, business incorporation papers for Pinnacle Roofing, where my money had paid for everything from the initial license to the first truck. But there were other papers too. Documents Vanessa didn't know about. Documents that would matter very soon. The recording app on my phone, for instance. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I'd learned that during my conversation with Samuel Green. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's perfectly legal. I'd been recording conversations with Vanessa for 2 weeks. Every rent demand, every threat, every comment about me being a burden or freeloading in my own house. 12 recordings, clear audio, timestamps, saved to cloud storage. Samuel had been very specific about this. Document everything, Henry. Dates, times, witnesses, if possible. The more evidence you have, the stronger your position becomes. My position. At 1 p.m., I called Samuel's office. He answered on the second ring. Henry, how are you holding up? They want me gone by June 1st. Rent or eviction. From property you own? 51% ownership. Samuel was quiet for a moment. And then, Henry, are you ready to make this official? What would that look like? We file a partition action, force a legal review of ownership rights. But understand, this isn't a gentle family conversation anymore. This is legal action. It changes everything. I thought about my insulin. 3 days left. I thought about Independence Manor and $800 rent payments. I thought about Vanessa's BMW and Bradley's silence. How long would it take? Emergency filing? We could have papers served by Wednesday. What kind of papers? Cease and desist on the eviction threats, legal notice of ownership rights, injunction preventing any changes to occupancy without court approval. I looked out my bedroom window. Vanessa was in the backyard setting up tables for tomorrow's barbecue. 25 neighbors, the whole cul-de-sac. Samuel, what if I wanted to handle this differently? More publicly? What do you mean? I mean, what if I wanted to educate my family about property law in front of witnesses? Would that be legal? Samuel chuckled. Henry, as long as you're not threatening anyone or breaking any laws, you can discuss property ownership wherever and whenever you want. It's your legal right. After I hung up, I opened my laptop. Bradley had given it to me for Christmas 2 years ago. A gesture of generosity when things were different. I pulled up Vanessa's Facebook page. She'd posted about tomorrow's barbecue. Memorial Day celebration with neighbors. Pictures of the house, the yard, the deck I'd helped pay for. 23 comments already. Neighbors saying they'd be there. Compliments about the house. Questions about the food. Dorothy Collins from next door had commented twice. She'd been watching the situation with interest. At 72, Dorothy had seen enough family drama to recognize trouble brewing. Last week, she'd stopped me while I was checking the mail. Henry, honey, is everything all right over there? I heard raised voices. Just family discussions, Dorothy. Nothing to worry about. But she was worried. I could see it in her eyes. Dorothy had been married to a diabetic for 30 years before Harold passed. She knew what insulin cost. She knew what it meant when someone started rationing medication. I checked my glucose. 174. Not terrible, but not great. I needed to eat something, but food would push it higher. Without enough insulin, every meal was a balancing act. Tomorrow's barbecue would be interesting. Vanessa loved showing off for the neighbors, loved playing the successful young homeowner. Tomorrow she'd learn something about ownership that wasn't in any of her real estate magazines. I opened my file cabinet one more time, found the folder marked Legal Options. Inside was a business card for a process server, someone Samuel had recommended, just in case. Memorial Day arrived with perfect weather. 75 degrees, sunny skies, gentle breeze, ideal for backyard barbecues and neighborhood gatherings. Vanessa was in her element. She'd spent 2 hours that morning arranging decorations, setting up the sound system, and positioning lawn chairs for optimal social interaction. I watched from my bedroom window as neighbors began arriving around noon. The Hendersons from across the street, the young couple with twin toddlers from the corner house, Dorothy Collins carrying a covered casserole dish. 25 people, as promised, maybe more. Bradley was manning the grill, wearing the apron I'd bought him for Father's Day last year. Vanessa flitted between groups, playing the perfect hostess, in her white sundress and designer sandals. $300 shoes for a backyard party. At 1:30, I checked my glucose. 207. Too high, but manageable. I took my last shot of insulin. The pen was empty now. Tomorrow I'd be rationing air. I opened my bedroom door and listened to the party sounds. Laughter, music, conversations about work and kids and vacation plans, normal neighbor talk. It was time to join them. I walked through the kitchen and onto the deck. Several neighbors waved. I'd met most of them during my 3 years here. The mailman's advantage. People remember the guy who brings their checks. "Henry," Dorothy called out, "come sit with us. I saved you a chair." I made my way over to her table. Dorothy, the Petersons from down the street, and Mike Collins from the hardware store. Good people. The kind who noticed when something wasn't right. Vanessa appeared at my elbow almost immediately. "Henry, we're running low on ice. Could you walk to the store and grab a couple bags?" Walk to the store, 20 minutes each way. She wanted me gone during peak socializing time. "Of course," I said. "But first, could I talk to you for just a minute about the household expenses we discussed?" Her smile flickered. "This isn't really the time." "Oh, it's the perfect time," I said, loud enough for Dorothy's table to hear. "I've been thinking about your rent proposal, and I have some questions." The conversations around us quieted slightly. Not obvious eavesdropping, but interested attention. Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper. "Henry, we can discuss this later. 600 a month, you said, starting June 1st. Henry, that's half my Social Security, more than I spend on insulin. But I've been researching property rights, and I discovered something interesting." Bradley looked over from the grill. Other neighbors were definitely listening now. "Did you know," I continued, "that someone who contributes to a down payment typically receives ownership equity, legal ownership?" Vanessa's face was turning red. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I? Because I have documentation showing I contributed $180,000 toward this house, plus another $130,000 for business startup. That's $310,000 total." Dorothy's eyes widened. Mike Peterson leaned forward in his chair. "Henry," Vanessa hissed, "stop talking about private financial matters." "Private? You made my living situation public when you gave me an eviction notice. In front of Bradley. In front of anyone who'd listen." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. Opened the recording app. "In fact, you've been quite vocal about my status in this household. Would you like me to play some of our recent conversations?" Her face went white. "You recorded me?" "Ohio is a one-party consent state. Perfectly legal to record conversations as long as one person knows about it." I pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the air crystal clear. "You eat our food, use our electricity. The least you could do is pay rent." Then my voice. "I put the down payment on this house." Then Vanessa again. "That was a gift. Ancient history." I stopped the recording. The deck was dead silent except for background music. Dorothy Collins spoke first. "Vanessa, honey, did you just say Henry put down $180,000 on this house?" "It's complicated." "And you're charging him rent?" Mike Peterson stood up. "Wait a minute. Henry, you're saying you own part of this property?" I pulled out the deed, unfolded it carefully. 51%, according to Franklin County records. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. Bradley finally abandoned the grill. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm explaining to our neighbors why a diabetic man who funded his son's success is being threatened with eviction from property he owns." Vanessa grabbed my arm. "You're ruining everything." "Am I? Or am I finally telling the truth about who paid for everything?" I gestured toward the house, the deck, the yard. New floors, granite countertops, professional landscaping, all paid for by a roofing business that exists because I emptied my retirement account. Dorothy stood up slowly. "Vanessa, this man is diabetic. How much does insulin cost these days?" "I don't see how that's—" $1,200 a month," I answered. "Without insurance. I've been rationing my medication because the money I gave my family apparently doesn't buy medical consideration." The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Mike Peterson spoke up. Vanessa, you drive that BMW. The X5, what's that payment? About 800 a month? She didn't answer. So you can afford 800 for a car, but Henry can't get help with insulin? Our finances are none of your business. Actually, Dorothy said, Henry's our neighbor, too. We care about him. And what you're describing sounds like elder abuse. Elder abuse. The words hit the deck like a physical blow. Vanessa looked around desperately. 25 neighbors staring at her. Bradley standing frozen by the grill. Her perfect Memorial Day party dissolving into public humiliation. Fine, she said. Henry, you want to air our private business? Let's air it all. Tell them about your son's marriage problems. Tell them about his drinking. I looked at her calmly. This isn't about Bradley's personal struggles. This is about property ownership and medical needs. Property ownership, she laughed bitterly. You want to talk about ownership? That's when I realized Vanessa was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Vanessa's voice rose above the party noise, carrying across the deck like a warning siren. You want to talk about ownership, Henry? Fine. Let's talk about who really owns this house. Who's been making mortgage payments for 5 years while you've been living here for free? Who's built equity while you've contributed nothing but problems? The neighbors watched like spectators at a tennis match. Dorothy Collins was taking notes on a napkin. I've contributed nothing? I asked quietly. Nothing that matters. Not lately. Bradley and I are the ones building a life here. Building a family. We're the ones who matter. Building a family. Interesting choice of words. And what about my contributions to that life? The $310,000 I invested in your success? Invested? She laughed, sharp and cruel. Old man, that was desperation money. You gave us that money because you were lonely and desperate for relevance after Sarah died. Don't dress it up as investment. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Dorothy Collins looked genuinely shocked. Desperation money, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? That's exactly what I'm calling it. And now you're trying to use emotional blackmail to guilt us into supporting your medical bills. Well, guess what? We don't owe you anything. Not rent relief, not insulin money, not special treatment because you're old and sick. Mike Peterson stood up. Vanessa, that's enough. No, it's not enough. You want the truth? Here's the truth. Henry is a burden. He's been a burden since the day he moved in. He doesn't contribute financially. He doesn't help around the house. And frankly, his medical needs are becoming expensive and inconvenient. Expensive and inconvenient. And, she continued, since we're airing everything publicly, maybe our neighbors should know that Henry isn't the only one with secrets in this family. She looked directly at Bradley. Maybe they should know about your girlfriend, Bradley, the one you've been seeing for 6 months. Maybe they should know that our marriage has been over for a year. Bradley's face went white. Vanessa, don't... Oh, but we're being honest now, aren't we, Henry? Complete transparency, so let's be completely honest. Bradley's been cheating with Rebecca from his office. I've been planning to divorce him and take half of everything, including this house. And you, Henry, have been the perfect excuse for financial stress that supports my case. The deck was dead silent now. Even the background music seemed to have stopped. Dorothy Collins broke the silence first. Vanessa, honey, there's something you need to understand about what Henry just told us. What's that, Dorothy? If Henry owns 51% of this house, you can't take half of anything in a divorce. You're not on the deed. Vanessa blinked. What do you mean I'm not on the deed? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder, the one I'd been saving for exactly this moment. I mean, I said quietly, that when Bradley and I bought this house in March of 2019, only 2 names went on the legal ownership documents. I opened the folder and removed the official deed, not a copy this time, the original, with the county clerk's seal and signature. Property owners, I read aloud, Henry Peterson, 51%, Bradley Peterson, 49%. I looked up at Vanessa. Your name appears nowhere on this document. The realization hit her like cold water. That can't be right. It's very right. In Ohio, marriage doesn't automatically grant property ownership. Only the names on the deed have legal claim to the house. Dorothy Collins was nodding. Harold and I went through this when we bought our house. If your name isn't on the deed, you don't own the property. But I've been paying the mortgage. You've been paying rent, essentially, Mike Peterson said, contributing to someone else's equity. I pulled out another document. This is the mortgage agreement. Bradley's name is on it as the borrower, but the property deed shows ownership percentages. I own 51% of the assets securing the loan. Vanessa looked at Bradley. Did you know this? Bradley's silence was answer enough. So when you threatened to take half the house in a divorce, I continued, you were threatening to take something that was never legally yours. I removed another paper from the folder. This is a property valuation I had done last week. Current market value, $420,000. My 51% stake is worth $214,200. Dorothy Collins was writing numbers on her napkin. Henry, that means if you wanted to sell your share or force a partition, I could require the property to be sold and collect my portion, yes. I turned to Vanessa. Which brings us back to your eviction notice. You can't evict someone from property they own. In fact, as the majority owner, I have certain rights regarding occupancy decisions. The neighbors were watching this like a legal drama unfolding in real time. Furthermore, I continued, your threats to force me out constitute harassment of a property owner. Your demands for rent from someone who owns 51% of the house could be considered fraudulent, and your statements about my medical needs being expensive and inconvenient might interest Adult Protective Services. Adult Protective Services. The words hung in the air like thunder. You're bluffing, Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its edge. I reached for my phone. Dorothy, would you mind being a witness while I make a call? Of course, honey. I dialed a number I'd memorized. Samuel Green's office. Samuel? It's Henry Peterson. Yes, I'm ready to proceed with the legal action we discussed. No, I'm at the house now, with witnesses. 25 neighbors, actually. Yes, she made the statements about eviction and medical expenses in front of everyone. Perfect. See you tomorrow. I hung up and looked around the deck. 25 pairs of eyes stared back at me. Tomorrow morning, I announced, my attorney will file several legal documents with Franklin County. A partition action requiring judicial review of property ownership, a cease and desist order preventing any further eviction threats, and a formal complaint regarding attempted fraud by someone demanding rent from a property owner. Vanessa sat down heavily in the nearest chair. But tonight, I continued, I think we should finish this barbecue. The food smells wonderful, Bradley, and Dorothy, your casserole looks delicious. I smiled at the gathered neighbors. Thank you all for witnessing this conversation. Sometimes family discussions require community perspective. Mike Peterson started clapping slowly. Then Dorothy joined in. Within seconds, the entire deck was applauding. Vanessa stared at them in disbelief. You're clapping for him? Dorothy Collins stood up, all 5 feet 2 inches of righteous indignation. Honey, we're clapping for justice, and for a man who's been more generous than his family deserved. The party continued, but everything had changed. Neighbors came over to shake my hand, to ask about my medical needs, to offer support. 3 different people offered to help with insulin costs until my insurance kicked in. Vanessa disappeared into the house. Bradley stayed by the grill, silent and shaken. I had won, not through anger or revenge, but through truth and documentation. Property ownership, it turned out, was a powerful thing. The next morning arrived with the precision of a court filing deadline. I was awake at 5 a.m., glucose checked, medication routine completed. My last insulin shot had been yesterday. Today, I'd start the dangerous game of managing diabetes without proper medication, unless things change quickly. At 8:30, Samuel Green arrived with a leather briefcase and 20 years of real estate law experience. I met him at the front door. Vanessa and Bradley were still asleep. Henry, how are you feeling about yesterday? Ready to make this official. We sat at the kitchen table while Samuel spread documents across the surface like a battle plan. Legal papers, court filings, and official notices that would change everything. I've prepared 4 separate actions, he said. First, a partition suit requiring judicial review of property ownership and occupancy rights. This prevents any changes to living arrangements without court approval. He showed me the papers. legal language that translated to nobody could force me out of my own house. Second, a cease and desist order regarding harassment and fraudulent rent demands. If Vanessa continues threatening eviction, she'll be in contempt of court. I signed where he indicated. Third, a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services regarding medical neglect and financial exploitation of an elderly person. Is that necessary? Henry, you're diabetic, you're being denied medical support, and someone is trying to extract rent money from a house you own. APS needs to know. The fourth document surprised me. A demand for property accounting, Samuel explained. All mortgage payments, improvements, and equity changes must be documented and reviewed. If they've been building equity with your asset as collateral, you're entitled to compensation. Bradley appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair messy, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He looked at the papers spread across the table. "Dad, what's all this?" "Legal protection," I said. "Sit down, we need to talk." Samuel gathered his papers efficiently. "I'll file these with the courthouse this morning. Henry, you should have copies of everything by noon. Service of process will happen this afternoon." After Samuel left, Bradley poured coffee with shaking hands. 3 years of taking advantage had come to an end, and he knew it. "Dad, I never wanted things to get this complicated." "Complicated? Son, someone tried to evict me from my own house. Someone demanded rent from a majority property owner. Someone told 25 neighbors that my medical needs were expensive and inconvenient. Which part of that sounds simple to you?" Vanessa gets carried away sometimes. This wasn't getting carried away. This was systematic financial abuse. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, showed him the account balance, $247. "This is what I have left after giving you $310,000. Yesterday was my last insulin shot. Today I start rationing air and hoping I don't go into diabetic coma." Bradley stared at the phone screen. "Dad, I didn't know it was that bad." "You didn't want to know. You and Vanessa have been living in willful ignorance while I've been living in medical danger." Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd been listening. "Henry, yesterday I said things I shouldn't have said." "You revealed your true feelings. That's different from saying things you shouldn't have said." She came down slowly, wearing a robe and yesterday's makeup. The queen of the household reduced to damage control. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want respect for my property ownership. I want acknowledgement of my financial contributions. I want medical support that reflects the $310,000 I invested in this family's success." "And if we don't agree?" I picked up one of Samuel's business cards from the table. "Then my attorney proceeds with all legal actions. Partition suit forces the sale of the house. I collect my 51%, which is currently worth $214,000. You collect nothing because you're not on the deed." "Where would we live?" "Not my problem. You're the one who declared our living arrangement unsustainable." Bradley set down his coffee cup. "Dad, that's our home." "No, son, it's my home. You live here because I allow it." The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. "However," I continued, "I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to discuss a family solution." "What kind of solution?" I pulled out a handwritten list. Terms I'd prepared at 3 a.m. while calculating insulin dosages. "First, all threats of eviction stop immediately. This is my house. I live here by right, not by permission. Second, my medical needs become a family priority. Insulin, doctor visits, emergency care, treated as essential household expenses. Third, respect for my contributions to this family's success. No more comments about being a burden or freeloading. And fourth, if this house is ever sold, property ownership percentages are honored. I get 51% of net proceeds." Vanessa and Bradley looked at each other. "What about the mortgage payments?" she asked. "We've been paying those for 5 years. You've been building equity in property I own. Samuel's accounting demand will calculate exactly how much equity you've built with my asset. You'll receive fair compensation. And if we agree to your terms?" Samuel withdraws the legal actions. We sign a family agreement outlining everyone's responsibilities and rights. We try to be a family again. The doorbell rang. Samuel, returning with filed paperwork and a process server. "That's your deadline," I said. "Legal proceedings start now, or family negotiations start now. Your choice. Bradley looked at Vanessa. She looked at the legal papers on the table, then at my nearly empty insulin pen on the counter, then at the phone displaying my bank balance. We agreed to negotiate, she said quietly. I stood up and opened the front door for Samuel. Cancel the process server. We're going to try family mediation first. Property ownership, it turned out, was an excellent negotiating position. 2 weeks later, our family looked completely different. The negotiation had taken 6 hours. Samuel Green mediating, Bradley and Vanessa on one side of the kitchen table, me on the other. Legal documents and financial records spread between us like evidence at a treaty signing. The final agreement was comprehensive. I would retain 51% ownership of the house. My name stayed on the deed as majority owner. Bradley kept 49%. Vanessa received no ownership stake, which reflected her lack of down payment contribution. Mortgage payments would continue as before, but my medical expenses became joint household priority. Insulin, doctor visits, prescriptions, treated as essential utilities like electricity or water. Bradley agreed to pay me $600 monthly from Pinnacle Roofing profits, not rent. Compensation for use of my property as collateral for business loans. The business I'd funded with $310,000 of retirement money. Most importantly, Vanessa agreed to attend family financial counseling. Her spending on luxury items would be limited until my medical needs were consistently met. The insulin situation resolved immediately. Bradley drove me to the pharmacy that afternoon, paid for 3 months of Novolog pens up front, $1,200, but he handed over his credit card without argument. My glucose numbers stabilized within days, 120 after meals, 140 at bedtime, normal ranges for the first time in months. The neighborhood dynamic changed too. Dorothy Collins stopped by twice a week to check on me. Mike Peterson offered to drive me to doctor appointments. 3 other neighbors volunteered to help with grocery shopping when needed. Word had spread beyond our cul-de-sac. The story of the diabetic father who reclaimed his house at a Memorial Day barbecue became neighborhood legend. Dorothy Collins had a talent for storytelling, and she'd shared our story with her bridge club, her church group, and anyone else who'd listen. That boy learned property law the hard way, she'd tell people, but Henry handled it with class, never raised his voice, just presented facts and let justice work. The legal changes were equally significant. Samuel Green had helped me establish a medical emergency fund. If my glucose ever spiked above 300, or if I couldn't afford medication, Bradley would receive automatic notification and financial responsibility would kick in immediately. We'd also created a property succession plan. If anything happened to me, my 51% ownership would transfer to a trust, benefiting my grandchildren when Bradley and Vanessa had them. This prevented anyone from selling the house without considering family stability. But the most important change was psychological. I wasn't the dependent elder anymore. I wasn't the burden who needed permission to exist in my own house. I was the majority property owner, the business investor, the family patriarch, who'd reclaimed his rightful position. Vanessa's attitude adjustment was remarkable. She still drove the BMW. We'd negotiated that as an existing expense. But the luxury shopping stopped. No more $300 shoes, no more designer handbags, no more weekend spa trips. Instead, she started cooking family dinners, real meals, planned around my dietary needs, diabetic-friendly recipes that didn't spike glucose. She even learned to calculate carbohydrate content for insulin dosing. "Henry," she said one evening while we were eating her homemade vegetable soup, "I owe you an apology, a real one." "For which part?" "All of it. The eviction threats, the rent demands, calling your medical needs inconvenient. That was unforgivable." "What changed your mind?" She thought carefully before answering. "Seeing those legal papers, realizing I'd been living in a fantasy where my opinions mattered more than property law, understanding that I'd been cruel to someone who'd given our family everything." Bradley's transformation was subtler but more meaningful. He started including me in business decisions again. Pinnacle Roofing was expanding. 2 new contracts, hiring more employees. He wanted my input on financial planning, equipment purchases, and growth strategies. You built this business as much as I did, he admitted during one of our evening conversations. Your investment made everything possible. I should have honored that. And the business was thriving partly because my property ownership had strengthened their credit profile. Banks looked more favorably on loan applications when the collateral included equity from a stable, long-term property owner. My monthly compensation of $600 felt like justice. Not charity, not allowance money, but fair payment for the use of my asset. The money covered my insulin completely, with enough left over for doctor visits and diabetes supplies. But perhaps the most satisfying change was community recognition. The story of our family negotiation had become a case study in elder rights and property law. Dorothy Collins had shared it with her daughter, who worked for the county's Adult Protective Services office. They'd started using our situation as an example of how family mediation could resolve elder abuse without destroying relationships. Samuel Green mentioned our case in a legal journal article about property ownership disputes. Names changed, details anonymized, but our story as an example of how clear documentation and legal knowledge could protect elderly property owners. Henry Peterson, he'd used my real first name, demonstrated that quiet strength and proper preparation can overcome even the most challenging family dynamics. I'd become an accidental advocate for elder rights. 3 months after the barbecue, my diabetes was under perfect control. My property ownership was legally protected. My family relationships were rebuilt on foundations of respect rather than dependency. But the most important change was internal. I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped asking permission to exist in my own house, stopped accepting medical neglect as a reasonable cost of family harmony. Generosity, I'd learned, had limits. Dignity was non-negotiable, and property ownership came with rights that couldn't be wished away by inconvenient relatives. The quiet mail carrier had found his voice, and it was legally binding. 6 months after the Memorial Day barbecue that changed everything, I was sitting on my deck, on my property, watching Bradley and Vanessa plant flowers in the garden. Their movements were careful, considerate. They asked before making changes to the landscaping now. My glucose monitor read 135. Perfect control. The Freestyle Libre system Bradley had bought me made testing painless and continuous. No more rationing test strips, no more guessing about blood sugar levels. My medication cabinet was fully stocked. 3 months of insulin pens in the refrigerator, backup supplies in case of emergencies, test strips, lancets, glucose tablets for low blood sugar episodes. Everything a diabetic needs for safe, dignified medical care. The business was thriving. Pinnacle Roofing had grown to 12 employees and 22 trucks. Bradley had promoted himself to general manager and hired an assistant to handle day-to-day operations. The company I'd funded with my retirement was now generating enough profit to support everyone comfortably. My monthly compensation had increased to $800, not because I demanded more, but because Bradley had calculated the actual value of my property contribution and decided $600 wasn't sufficient. Dad, he'd said during our quarterly business review, you put down $180,000 in 2019. With appreciation, that contribution is worth about $230,000 now. $800 monthly is still below market rate for your investment. Market rate for my investment. Language that acknowledged my role as business partner, not charity recipient. The family dynamic had stabilized into something healthy. Vanessa and I had developed mutual respect based on clearly defined boundaries. She managed household operations efficiently. I provided property ownership stability, and Bradley focused on business growth. We'd even started having family dinners together. Real conversations about plans, dreams, and challenges. No more walking on eggshells around my medical needs or financial contributions. But the biggest change was community recognition. Dorothy Collins had nominated me for the Neighborhood Association's Good Neighbor Award. The citation read, "For demonstrating that family challenges can be resolved with dignity, documentation, and determination. Mike Peterson had asked me to speak at his Rotary Club about elder rights and family financial planning. Apparently, our story had inspired other families to have difficult conversations about property ownership and medical responsibilities. Samuel Green still called occasionally to check on the family agreement. No legal issues, no violations of our negotiated terms. The mediation had worked exactly as intended. "Henry," he'd said during our last conversation, "you've become my favorite success story. Proves that sometimes the best legal strategy is simply knowing your rights and standing up for them calmly." Standing up for them calmly. That had been my secret weapon. No shouting, no threats, no emotional manipulation, just facts, documentation, and legal knowledge applied with quiet determination. My health had improved dramatically. The stress of medical insecurity had been affecting more than just my blood sugar. My blood pressure was down, my sleep was better, my energy levels had returned to normal. I'd even started dating. Dorothy Collins had introduced me to her sister-in-law, Patricia, a widow from the next town over. We'd had coffee 3 times and dinner twice. She was impressed by my property ownership story. "Most men our age are downsizing," she'd said. "You stood your ground and came out stronger. That takes character." Character. I like that description better than stubborn old man or difficult father. The grandchildren question had come up recently. Bradley and Vanessa were talking about starting a family now that their finances were stable. I'd made it clear that any grandchildren would be welcome in my house that would someday be their inheritance through the trust Samuel had established. Family legacy planning with actual assets to leave behind. Another benefit of property ownership. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned to value myself appropriately. $310,000 invested in family success wasn't charity or desperation money. It was love expressed through financial support. Love that deserved acknowledgement and respect. The man who'd been threatened with eviction from his own house was now the patriarch of a successful multi-generational family business. The diabetic who'd been denied medical support now had comprehensive health care and emergency protections. The quiet mail carrier had taught his family and his community that generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. That dignity isn't negotiable. That property ownership comes with rights that matter. If you're watching this story and facing similar family challenges, remember, document everything, know your legal rights, and never apologize for standing up for yourself with quiet strength. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and share your own stories of setting healthy family boundaries. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be powerless.